During my son's graduation from high school, my parents made an unexpected announcement. They intended to take possession of his college fund and redirect it to my nephew, Jason. My husband, Mark, found this amusing and replied, almost nonchalantly, "That's funny, because we actually moved it last month." The realization struck my parents, and they began raising their voices. I vividly recall that evening when everything seemed to fall apart, a night meant for celebrating. My son, Ethan, had diligently toiled for years, excelling in AP courses, maintaining part-time jobs, and managing extracurricular activities. Through sheer determination, he had secured admission to his dream college. Our entire family had gathered for this joyous occasion, or at least so I believed. We had chosen a nice steakhouse, a gesture of something special, and although my parents and I had our differences, I needed them there. I wanted them to partake in this significant moment for Ethan. However, my parents had different intentions. As the waiter placed our drinks on the table, my mother, with an insincere smile, tapped her glass with a fork and stood up. The room fell silent, and the atmosphere grew heavy. She cleared her throat dramatically, scanned the room, and then announced, "We've decided to take Ethan's college fund and give it to his cousin, Jason, instead. He needs it more." The room was enveloped in silence as I froze, my heart pounding. Ethan's complexion turned ghostly pale, his eyes meeting mine. Mark's grip on his fork tightened, while my younger daughter looked bewildered by the tension that suffocated the room. My dad nodded, as if this course of action was perfectly reasonable. "It's what's best for the family," he added, as if that justified their decision entirely. "Jason's had a tough time, and this will really help him get his life back on track." My nephew, Jason, the one my parents perpetually favored over my kids, was once again being prioritized. The very kid they had bailed out repeatedly, the one who never faced repercussions for his actions. Suddenly, at my son's graduation dinner, it was declared that the future Ethan had worked so hard for would be handed to the one who hadn't earned it. The heat of anger rose in me. Years of swallowing my frustration, of allowing my parents to dismiss my children in favor of my brother's family, boiled over in that moment. However, before I could voice my thoughts, Mark leaned back, took a sip of his beer, and calmly remarked, "That's funny, because we moved it last month." Everything came to a halt. My mother blinked in astonishment, and my father's smile faltered. "What?" she demanded, her voice as cold as ice. Mark maintained his composure. "Yes, we anticipated this, so we moved Ethan's college fund where you can't reach it weeks ago." And that was the moment the storm unleashed. My mother's face turned a shade of red I hadn't thought possible. She stood so swiftly, I feared she might faint from sheer anger. "You had no right," she screamed. My dad slammed his hand on the table with such force that silverware rattled. "You can't do that," he declared, raising his voice. "That money was meant for family." Finally, I found my voice and let go of the frustrations I had been bottling up for so long. "Ethan is family, and that fund belonged to him. You have no say in this." "You're being selfish," my mom retorted. "Jason needs this more. You know how difficult things have been for your brother. We're helping him, and you're ruining it." It became abundantly clear to me then that they had never truly intended for that money to go to Ethan. It was a game to them, waiting for the opportune moment to seize what wasn't theirs and give it to the one who hadn't earned it. I looked at Ethan, and it felt like witnessing his soul being torn apart. He had always known deep down that his grandparents didn't favor him, but this was different. It was the cold, hard truth that they didn't care, and it shattered something within me. Turning back to my parents, my voice trembling with rage, I said, "Oh, you mean like the time you fixed things after Jason stole from us, or when he was arrested and you paid off his charges, or when he wrecked my brother's car and you bought him a new one?" My dad growled defensively, "That's not the same thing. Jason has been struggling. Your brother's a single father, doing his best." I cut him off, "And I'm a mother, doing mine. You just told my son, on one of the most significant days of his life, that his future doesn't matter, that you were taking his chance at a better life." My mom dismissed me, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, Ethan can just get student loans like everyone else." That was the breaking point. Ethan stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly. His voice wavered, but it carried a strength that cut through the chaos. You know what? I don't need anything from you. I don't need your money, and I definitely don't need you in my life. Mark stood as well, placing a steady hand on Ethan's shoulder. Let him go, he said, his voice calm yet firm. We don't owe them another second of our time. With that, we finalized our decision. I stood, affirming what I already knew deep inside. This family, these people, had crossed an unforgivable line, and everything had irrevocably changed. This was your last chance, I told my parents. You've consistently shown us who you are, but today ensured we'll never forget. And with those words, we left. The air felt suffocatingly thick as we stepped outside of the restaurant. In the dim parking lot of that restaurant, my parents' furious voices shattered the silence, accusing us of breaking up the family and calling us ungrateful. Yet, I didn't turn back. My focus was entirely on my son. Walking beside me with his head held high was Ethan, his eyes swirling with emotions despite maintaining his composure. It was clear to me then, we had made the right decision. Ethan was my son, and I was determined to protect his future at any cost. However, the extent my parents would go to reclaim that money was unfathomable. Initially, it began with incessant phone calls, each voicemail more enraged than the last. My mom's furious cries echoed with betrayal, while my dad's cold threats, "You'll regret this," he'd sneer, sharp as knives over the phone, made it all the more unbearable. 2 days later, my brother contacted me for the first time since that night, simply stating, "Jason needs that money more than Ethan. You're being selfish," offering neither questions nor understanding. I ignored it, knowing this was only the beginning. The real chaos unfolded a week later with a phone call I'll never forget. Mark was in the kitchen when the phone rang, and I was washing dishes when I heard him ask, "Excuse me, what withdrawal?" The panic hit me hard, freezing me in place. The ensuing conversation was brief, but spoke volumes. As Mark hung up, his jaw was tight with anger. "Your parents," he revealed, voice laced with fury, attempted to access Ethan's fund by impersonating us for an emergency withdrawal. Mark explained how the bank was suspicious and called us first. A wave of indignation surged through me. How dare they? Without hesitation, I called my dad. "Did you actually try to steal from us?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. His response was shocking. Calm and devoid of guilt, he stated. "You left us no choice." His casual tone made my blood boil. It escalated quickly with my dad coldly reminding me, "You think you did this all alone? We contributed to that fund." His words stopped me cold, and my mom chimed in sharply, insisting we were remembering wrong and threatening legal action. The mention of a lawsuit sent a jolt of fear through me, but Mark reassured. Their stance was baseless. Despite his assurances, doubt gnawed at me. 3 days later, our fears materialized when a thick envelope appeared on our doorstep. My heart sank seeing the return address. It was from a lawyer. With trembling hands, I rushed inside and tore it open. Mark, casually flipping through a magazine, asked, "What's that?" As I skimmed the pages, dread seeped in. They were suing us. They claimed co-ownership of Ethan's college fund, arguing illegal transfer without consent. Mark snatched the papers, reading with disbelief. "This is complete nonsense," he muttered. But I knew my parents' manipulative prowess, twisting truths to embody victimhood. In the ensuing days, we meticulously combed through records, bank statements, transfer receipts, every deposit. They wouldn't take what was rightfully Ethan's without a fight. During a pivotal lawyer meeting, my parents played their card, a decade-old receipt for a single $2,000 deposit. Sitting there with smug expressions, their lawyer asserted this contribution warranted shared control. The injustice of it was palpable, the words leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. $2,000, and they believed it justified seizing Ethan's future. My mother smiled so sweetly, one would think she was stating something perfectly logical. It was a contribution, and without it, you'd never have saved so much, she said, implying control over the entire fund. Anger surged in me, but Mark kept his cool, breathing deeply before cutting through their nonsense. "Let me clarify," he stated calmly. "You believe a one-off gift over a decade ago allows you to decide where this money goes?" My dad, in all his arrogance, nodded, asserting, "Exactly." I wanted to scream, to tear down the courtroom with the truth of their overreach. But their audacity continued unabated for weeks. Eventually, the court ruled against my parents. They had no claim over Ethan's fund. Victory? In a way. They couldn't touch the money now, but the message was clear. My parents were determined to retaliate for our stand for Ethan. Just 2 weeks after the ruling, Mark returned home with a ghostly pallor. "They reported us," he said, his voice stressed. I blinked, trying to comprehend. "To the IRS," he explained. "They're accusing us of tax fraud." His words packed a cold punch, stopping my world. I couldn't breathe. I was suffocated by the weight of the accusations. My parents had informed the IRS we were misreporting finances and hiding money. "This is insane," I whispered, my heart pounding in my throat. Mark nodded solemnly. "Now we're under investigation." That was the breaking point. I believed the lawsuit was the worst part, a betrayal. Yet nothing prepared me for the IRS on our doorstep. It was then I knew it was war. My parents aimed not just at Ethan's college fund, but at our destruction. The investigation began with a letter, formal and cold, announcing our finances were under scrutiny for suspected tax discrepancies. Mark read it first, turning pale, then handed it to me in silence. My hands trembled as I processed the words. "This can't be real," I whispered, struggling to keep calm. "Oh, it's real," Mark muttered, his eyes hardening. Then came the call. A tactful yet firm IRS agent detailed an anonymous tip signaling hidden assets and fraudulent transfers. We knew precisely who instigated this, though proving it required effort. For weeks, we immersed ourselves in paperwork, bank statements, and tax records, anything to clear our names. Yet as we delved deeper, stakes rose. The most devastating blow: Ethan's financial aid tethered to IRS review. They hadn't just targeted his college fund, they'd jeopardized his future. That snapped something in me. If it was a war they wanted, war they'd have. I started digging, aware of how my parents twisted truths, manipulated facts for gains. It wasn't long before I uncovered their misstep. Long ago, Mark helped them with rental property investments, handling paperwork, and tax filings. They'd been underreporting their rental income for years, feeling untouchable, but leaving a trail. I wouldn't report immediately. No, I'd first make them feel it, hitting where it hurt, pride. I called my mother. She answered with smugness. "Oh, finally ready to apologize?" Laughter threatened. Instead, I replied coldly, "I've found the true tax fraud in this family." She was silent, then scoffed. "What are you talking about?" "The hidden rental income of 15 years, I retorted, hearing her breath hitch. Panicking. "You don't know what you're talking about," she sputtered. "Oh, I do," I responded icy. "And soon, so will the IRS, unless you back off." I sensed her shock. "You wouldn't," she challenged. My grin was slow, dark. "Try me." Her silence was palpable before the line went dead. 2 days later, a call from the IRS informed us the case was deprioritized. Bureaucracy moved at unexpected speed. A week passed, and Ethan's fund unfroze. I felt we had won for now. They had backed off. The home invasion unfolded late at night. Mark and I were interrupted from our sleep by the sound of shattering glass. For a brief moment, I thought I was dreaming, until the noise of footsteps moving across our house jolted me fully awake. Anticipating what was happening, Mark sprang out of bed, quickly grabbing the baseball bat he stored nearby. With a quick gesture, he urged me to dial 911. My trembling hands struggled to operate the phone. Suddenly, a voice called out, panic-laden and frantic. "Mom, Dad, Ethan." A dreadful nausea hit me. It was Ethan. Instead of keeping safe, he had awakened and was descending the stairs. "Stay in your room," Mark commanded, but it was too late. As Ethan reached the stairway summit, There stood Jason, wild-eyed and intoxicated, clutching a crowbar. In that instant, time seized up and no one dared move. Jason took a faltering step forward, his breath heavy with rage, demanding, "Where is it?" Mark tightened his grip on the bat. "Where's what?" Jason continued, his voice cracking. "The money. They promised it to me." It felt like a punch. Knowing they couldn't legally touch the inheritance, my parents had sent Jason, positioning their grandson as the wronged, one if only he could take it by force. Jason lurched our way, the crowbar aloft, asserting, "You think you can take what's rightfully mine?" His voice drenched in entitlement. That's when Ethan, undeterred, stepped forward. "It was never yours," he stated calmly, though his eyes betrayed his fear. "And you need to leave." Jason's laugh resonated with cold bitterness. "Oh, and what will you do about it?" At that crucial juncture, Mark acted. He swung the bat, not at Jason but against the wall beside him. The resounding crack of wood on plaster seemed to snap Jason from his stupor, his brows lifting in surprise, the crowbar lowering in realization. He turned without another word and fled into the night. The police came shortly after, arresting Jason for attempted burglary. Predictably, my parents ensured he wouldn't face repercussions, releasing him before dawn. My mother's subsequent call was dripping with audacity. "You've crossed the line," she hissed. "You got him arrested." I felt incredulous, yet held my resolve. "Your responsibility, your son," but voiced none of this. "You're the one who sent him," I accused in silence. Her response was a chilling whisper. "You'll regret this." And this time, I did believe her. It wasn't a mere family spat anymore. Something much graver was brewing. 2 weeks hence, what was anticipated as a conciliatory family gathering devolved into conflict. My brother reached out. "It's all too much," he professed, sounding utterly defeated. "Mom and Dad, Jason, they're falling apart. We have to talk." Though every instinct told me to close that chapter, Mark urged for dialogue, maybe answers. Relenting, I agreed, arranging a Sunday meet at my parents' home. The atmosphere felt warlike. Ethan refused to join, simply stating, "I'm through with them," leaving me understanding of his absence. The parental tension was palpable, my mother's tight-lipped expression echoing regret. My father, stoically aloof, wouldn't meet her gaze. Upon my brother's arrival with Jason, my tension heightened. Jason appeared a shell, gaunt and fragile, eyes betraying the weight of the world. My mom motioned us to sit. I remained unyielding. "Let's conclude this," I insisted. Wearily, my brother started. "We all messed up." Mark's bitterness wasn't disguised. "Messed up," retorted my brother, tried amending. "It's not what our parents intended." My bitterness erupted again. And what did they intend by exploiting my son and instigating a break-in? Jason's voice, frail and strained, broken. "I didn't intend to harm," he sighed. "I just thought it belonged to me." Containing my fury, I echoed, "Yours?" Jason anxiously glanced toward my mother, who averted her guilty eyes, revealing the truth I dreaded. "You told him, didn't you?" I whispered, with newfound certainty. Confronting her, Jason's face went pale as he looked between my mother and me. I accused my mother. "You told him Ethan's fund was always meant for him, that it was his from the start, didn't you?" His guilt was evident as his eyes darted around. My mom's response came in a harsh, defensive tone. "We had to. Your brother was struggling. We had to give him hope." I couldn't believe it. "So you lied," I snapped. "You told him his future was secured with money that was never his. You turned hope into a lie." My father interjected coldly. "What does it matter? You and Mark have everything, while Jason had nothing. What kind of sister are you to let your nephew suffer?" Something snapped inside me. "What kind of parents are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. "You've always treated me like a second-class citizen while handing everything to him." My mother's face flushed with anger, but I continued. "You chose my brother over me, and this time you were caught." The room fell silent. Jason looked shattered, whispering, "You lied to me." Realization dawned on him as he turned to my parents. "You knew." The guilt in my father's eyes was clear, but Jason's disbelief turned to a hollow laugh. "I'm sorry," he whispered to me, and with regret in his eyes, he left. My parents yelled accusations, but I simply stated, "We're done," and meant it. Mark, my steady partner, sat back, not arguing because our fight was over, but the wounds remained. Jason reached out to apologize, admitting he had believed our parents too long, but it was too late. He moved on, getting a job and enrolling in community college, trying to change. But my son Ethan was no longer a pawn. He went to his college, the one he earned, with his money. My parents never saw a penny, nor did they see us again. Alone at night, cutting off my parents felt like a phantom limb, a grief that left a hole in my heart. I knew the pain wasn't just about money. The hardest thing was walking away from those who should love you unconditionally, despite their failures. Sometimes burying the past is better than letting it poison the future, so I chose to live.